Alabama 42, LSU 13. I want to give a parental advisory to all of the young LSU fans that are tuning into this segment. You might want to click off because we're about to discuss some violent details that took place tonight in Death Valley, because Alabama came into your trap and they took over your trap and they just embarrassed you. And a few years ago, when you hired Brian Kelly to replace Ed Orgeron, you were sold that Brian Kelly was going to be the dude to help you be what Alabama was under Nick Saban. Maybe not that good, but somewhere around that realm. And all the Brian Kelly tenure has been at LSU is a massive disappointment and a waste of a lot of money. Kalen DeBoer out-coached Brian Kelly tonight, just coached circles around this dude. And with this win, Kalen DeBoer is now 15-3 all time against ranked teams in his career. Meanwhile, Brian Kelly, the few years that he's been at LSU, he's 4-8 against ranked teams. Is this really what you paid for? I thought you were paying all this money to Brian Kelly for him to have you competing for national championships year in and year out. This is the same coach who had 3 first-round picks on this squad last year, and at best could only win 9 games. Normally, when you have a Heisman contender on your team, you at least make it to the conference championship game. You couldn't even do that with Jaden Daniels, who's carving it up right now in the NFL. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., they already have established themselves as one of the best young and upcoming receivers in the game, and Brian Kelly couldn't win with that squad. And this year, with the playoffs expanding to 12 teams, you would think that LSU would be a lock to get into the playoffs, because no way Brian Kelly's going to lose more than 2 games in the season, right? At Notre Dame, he said that he didn't have everything he needed to compete for a national championship consistently up there. He made all these excuses about how he needed more resources, he needed better players. Notre Dame wasn't able to give him that. So he comes down to Death Valley and still continues to underachieve like he did at Notre Dame. Meanwhile, Kalen DeBoer last year took Washington to the national championship game, took down Steve Sarkisian in the semifinals with the 34th rated roster in America that season. This is why great coaches in college football prove they're great coaches, because they can win with less. If you can win at Washington, you can definitely win at a place like Alabama with superior resources. Brian Kelly, though, he was underachieving at Notre Dame, and he still continues to underachieve at LSU. He couldn't do more with less at Notre Dame, and then he gets to LSU, he's doing less with more. You got all the best resources in America. You got all the money to spend on recruiting and NIL, and yet you still can't make it into the 12-team college football playoffs. Come on now. This game not only killed LSU's playoff chances, because the 3-loss team is not going to get in this thing, at least this season. That's not going to happen. And also it showed that Brian Kelly is officially the biggest fraud in college football. I've been telling you about this guy for the last 2 seasons, and a lot of you LSU fans refuse to see the truth with this guy. Do you see the truth now? You're never going to win anything special with Brian Kelly as the head coach. This is a good team. You're going to have like 3-4 first-round picks from this squad that get drafted in next year's draft. You were supposed to have the best offensive line in college football. What happened to that tonight? What happened to what was supposed to be improved defense when you hired defensive coordinator Blake Baker from Missouri? LSU's run defense was an abomination tonight. And they've struggled on the ground all season long. Tonight, they gave up 312 rushing yards. 185 of those yards were thanks to Jalen Milroe just embarrassing this defense. They were just allergic to tackling Jalen Milroe. Anytime he took off with the ball in his hands, this man was making some big plays happen. And not only did you give up 312 tonight against Bama, but you gave up 242 yards when you lost to Texas A&M on the road in College Station. Ole Miss dropped 180 rushing yards on you. South Carolina had 243 rushing yards against you. The run defense has killed LSU all season long. And their red zone struggles still continue to be a problem. They can't finish drives. We saw early in this game, they drive downfield, they get into the red zone, and they're forced to have to kick a field goal. And then you also get a costly interception by Garrett Nussmeier, which is really when the game went out of whack for you, and Alabama just completely took over this thing. And Garrett Nussmeier, when I watch him, I see a quarterback that makes a lot of NFL caliber throws. He can fit a lot of tight passes into small windows. You know, he has a really good arm, really good mobility, but he reminds me a lot of Jameis Winston when he was at Florida State, because as good as what Jameis Winston was when he was playing for the Seminoles, the dude was a turnover machine, and that is the same issue that Garrett Nussmeier has. Similar to Jameis Winston, he just can't take care of the football. Tonight you had 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and a fumble. You also had 3 interceptions when you imploded in the second half against Texas A&M. Garrett Nussmeier, it's not fair to put all the blame on Brian Kelly for why LSU has came up short this year and why they have underachieved this season. You got to give Garrett Nussmeier a fair share of the criticism. As much as it is easy to slander Brian Kelly, he's not out there throwing these passes. Garrett Nussmeier is, and at times, the guy just seems to have tunnel vision. That red zone interception that he threw made me laugh, because that's the same interception that I throw in the red zone every time I play college football 25. And Garrett Nussmeier, he has been in this LSU program for a while, so I wouldn't technically call him a young player. He is a little bit of a veteran, but he still is fairly young because he doesn't have a lot of starts under his belt, and I believe next season he'll be better than what he's been this year. And he hasn't even been that bad. It's just that in big games and crucial moments in the second half, the guy just falls apart. I don't know what it is with Garrett Nussmeier. Maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe it's the play calling. But tonight was the bow tie around what's been a really underwhelming season for LSU this year. You start off week 1 losing to Lincoln Riley and USC, which turns out the Trojans suck this year. Then you get a big win against Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. Cool, but then you drop 2 of your other biggest games on the schedule to close out against A&M on the road in College Station after Garrett Nussmeier was talking shit about College Station not being that hostile of an environment to play in, and then you just get obliterated by the biggest rival that you play. This, to me, shows that LSU needs to part ways with Brian Kelly. There's no reason keeping this guy around. He just isn't a good enough coach for LSU to win a national championship or even win the SEC in the toughest conference in America. When Brian Kelly first entered the SEC, when LSU made the move to steal him from Notre Dame, he was a big fish in somewhat of a small pond, because at the time he took this job, there weren't a lot of elite coaches in college football. But fast forward to now, you got Kalen DeBoer, you got Mike Elko, you got way more good coaches in this conference now than what they were when Brian Kelly first got hired down in Death Valley. And with more good coaches entering this conference, it further has exposed how big of a fry Brian Kelly is, because he went from being a big fish in a small pond to becoming a little fish in the ocean. If you were to rank your top 3 coaches in the SEC right now, Brian Kelly wouldn't even sniff close to any of these guys. You definitely would have Kirby Smart, then Steve Sarkisian, then Kalen DeBoer, and then at 4, I probably would go Mike Elko before I take Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly cannot win big games. Alabama tonight, they just put on the onslaught. They murdered these guys in their own home turf, which makes this loss even more embarrassing. And Jalen Milroe, listen, I apologize to you, brother. You feel me? Like, I crucified you after that loss against Tennessee, and I felt like you deserved that criticism. You were playing like shit. You feel me? You weren't looking like a Heisman contender like you were to start this season against Wisconsin, but Against Missouri, he played pretty well, but tonight was the best game that Jalen Milroe has played in nearly a month and a half. He didn't really do that much through the air, only had 109 passing yards, but he didn't really need to throw the football that much because LSU's run defense just let you get whatever you wanted to every time you tote the rock. I was really impressed with how good Alabama played in this game. Both sides of the ball, defense, offense, special teams, flawless execution tonight out of the Tide. And a lot of you Alabama fans owe Kalen DeBoer a huge apology because after Alabama lost to Vanderbilt and Tennessee, you guys were ready to put this dude's head on a platter. Kalen DeBoer has won every word that he's been. And he's doing the same thing that he's done all throughout his coaching career right now at Alabama. With how tough the SEC is, you're going to have a few hiccups here and there. But in the last year that Kalen DeBoer has been coaching, from not just Bama, but at Washington, he's beaten some of college football's best coaches. He's beaten Dan Lanning twice. He beat Steve Sarkisian in the semifinals last year. He's beaten Kirby Smart. And he has another great one to add on to his resume, taking down the biggest fraud in the sport, which is Brian Kelly. Right now, Kalen DeBoer is the best head coach in college football. You see how Georgia looks. Alabama has played their best football when it matters the most, the final stretch of the season. When you're trying to make a playoff push, this is when you want your team playing their best ball. And that's what Alabama has done ever since that loss to Tennessee. You know, Kalen DeBoer tonight, I was really impressed with how he had this team ready to play, how prepared they looked. And even Kurt Herbstreit said it throughout the game, throughout the stream. He was saying how it just looked like Alabama, whatever they were doing all the week in practice leading up to this game, it was just working. It just worked. And LSU, whatever they did in practice, man, they should have just scratched that game plan at halftime. It was 21-6 going into the half. This was not the game that I'm pretty sure any of us were expecting. We were expecting to see an all-time classic. We were expecting to see a dogfight, and we got the complete opposite. And what's even more surprising is that LSU got beat badly at home. How often does LSU lose this bad at home? Not too often. Last time I recall LSU getting embarrassed like this in Death Valley was when they played that Hendon Hooker-led Tennessee squad, and Tennessee roughed them up pretty bad that year. But other than that, you know, I can't recall the last time somebody just took over Death Valley. If you watch this game until like the last 3 minutes of the fourth quarter and you saw the camera cut of the stadium, there were more Alabama fans than there were LSU fans. And the ones that did stay, they just looked depressed. Because that's what watching LSU football under Brian Kelly does to you as a Tigers fan. It makes you depressed because you keep asking yourself, why are we underachieving when we are paying top dollar for somebody who's supposed to be an elite head coach? We got the best resources, the best facilities in college football. We got everything that's needed to be a contender year in and year out as far as the national championship. But yet, we're not even sniffing close to those ambitions because Brian Kelly is a fraud. And tonight showed that. And if you're an LSU fan and you're still in denial about it, you need to go back and watch the highlights of this game because it was an ass kicking for 60 minutes. Not at no point during this game that LSU looked like they belong on the same field as Alabama. Alabama came into your trap and they took over your trap. They spat on you. They embarrassed you. They ate you up, spat you back out, ate you up again, and spat you back out repeatedly. Just stomped you in your home territory. This is an embarrassing loss for Brian Kelly and a statement win for Kalen DeBoer and the Tide.